Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast with me, Errol Lawson. If this is your first time here, we want to welcome you. If you're an organizational leader or manager in church-based ministry, in business, in academia, then you're definitely in the right place. In addition to hosting the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast, I also offer one-to-one and group coaching for leaders and leadership teams that want to improve their effectiveness and become more productive and increase their performance. Inspirational, entertaining, and engaging keynote talks that will help shift the mindset of your leaders and bring about the organizational culture that you really desire. For more information or to book a free, no obligation consultation to see whether we're the right fit for each other, simply drop me an email today at errol@errollawson.com, and I'd love to have a chat with you. Thank you for listening. Enjoy today's show. Hello and welcome again to the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast with me, Errol Lawson, and my very special guest today is Andy Edmiston. Andy is, amongst other things, he has spent the last 20 years with the IM Group in the role of Group Managing Director. The IM Group is responsible for Subaru, Isuzu, and Great Wall motor brands across many European markets and has a portfolio of properties across the world managed by IM Properties. Andy has helped steer the company through economic difficulties while at the same time preparing for the next phase of its growth. And outside of this, with his wife Alison, he has established a charity called Imagine the Day and helped to pioneer the Mosaic Church in Coventry. They have 5 children together. Andy, thank you for joining us today, my friend.
No problem at all.
Thank you for being with us. Before we go into our interview today, Andy, please fill in any gaps, first of all, in your bio right there, and give us a glimpse into what you're up to in the world right now.
No real gaps, I suppose. My education, I could add, I'm a trained accountant. I worked actually before I came. Our business is a family business. It was started by my father about 40 years ago. And so I worked for some other motor businesses around the Midlands area before I came to the company here. And of course, like typical father-son family business, I actually came as a qualified accountant, but he sort of said to me, "No, son, you're going to start right at the very bottom." And so that was my start in the business, really. And actually, it proved to be exactly the right thing for him to do. So up to all kinds of things, really, but we'll probably get into that, I think, as the conversation goes on.
Cool. Well, you mentioned a bit about your dad being in the business and you working under your dad for a while. Keen to know, how did you know that this is what you were called to do, to go into this line of business? Can you tell us that story of how it all began?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many people, my experience, I had a very sort of settled family experience. I was raised in a Christian family. And when I was younger, my father was like a hero to me, really. He was my dad. And, you know, obviously as you get older and become a father yourself, and even if you don't become a father yourself, you begin to realize that actually, you know, life is a very mixed thing. You know, the human condition, sometimes you do things you're proud of, other times you do things you're not so proud of. But in those days, for me, looking at my father, he could do no wrong, really. And he had the coolest job in the world, as far as I could see it, was that he ran a car business. And our company came out of a brand called Jensen Motors, which was a little bit like Aston Martin. So very exciting cars, big, powerful, you know, American V8 engines, lots of leather. They smelled fantastic. And I just remember as a 6, 7, 8-year-old lad being driven around various different places by my dad in these Jensens, and I loved the cars. I fell in love with the cars, really. So since, you know, he started a car business, and he wanted to, I think, you know, he had a kind of a dream of handing the business on to his son. Obviously, that means that the son, it only works if the son is happy to do it. But I was more than happy. As I said, my dad was my hero. So it kind of really began, the dream began in me from a quite young age, really. It was, I never once questioned, you know, what else would I want to do in life? No, that was exactly it. I wanted to follow into the family business.
That's great. And I guess on that journey then, was there like a turning point for you? Maybe like a sort of a revelation moment where maybe you're heading in one direction and something happened, an event happened that caused you to go in a different direction altogether?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps there's a lot of different answers I could give to that. But if I give you something that was very instrumental, I was already in the business. I'd run a number of different businesses within our group of companies. But at the point that it came time for my father to begin the process of, sort of effectively retiring from the business and for me to replace him at the top of the company, I was probably, how old would I have been? In my mid-30s. And he suggested to me that I go away and study for 2 months at Harvard. And of course, I said to him, well, come on, Dad, I'm busy. I've got lots of things. I've got 5 children, not to mention. I can't go and just take 2 months out and go to Boston and study. And, we had, the best way these conversations are resolved really is he would say that if we have a disagreement, we just keep talking about it until I come round to his way of thinking. And that's probably the best way to resolve a disagreement. So that's sort of what happened, really. But actually, I'm really glad that it did happen, because even though I knew quite a lot of things about our business, I'd run successfully some companies within our business, what I learned there really propelled me to another level in terms of my own business career, really. And that was about 2005 that I did that. And, of course, just around the corner, we had the 2008 recession. And so much of what I learned there really stood me in very, very good stead to handle the company and help sort of bring the company through some difficult times that were around the corner. God works like that. Very often, how when my father said to me, I want you to go away for 2 months and study, everything within me said, this is stupid. Why should I be doing this? And, the sort of the old man comes up within you, the ego, that sort of arrogant bloke on your shoulder that says, you don't need to have others help, you can do this yourself. You've got to sort of put him back in his box, really. And I kind of had to do that. And actually, I could see God moving in that, really. I mean, it wasn't just my father asking me. I think God used that whole occasion. So
what was the biggest insight or takeaway you got from that time at Harvard? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I mean, there was many. So, for example, I worked for 2 other businesses before I joined the family business, and our company was the third. So I had my real experience or in-depth experience of working for businesses was 3. Within 2 months at Harvard, we studied in detail, in great detail, big case studies, often talking to the people involved in the case studies. We studied about 110 different companies in that 2 months. So it massively broadened my business horizon and understanding of various different situations and how other people dealt with them. But to answer your question more directly, I think the main thing, there was one lecturer we had there who unfortunately died since then. He was not an old guy, and he was our strategy lecturer. And so I thought I understood strategy up to that point, but really that kind of completely turned around my thinking and understanding of what strategy is, how you can use strategy to overcome certain problems. And I think that was something that was very foundational, actually, in what I went on to do after that time.
That's great. So what's been your biggest challenge in leadership so far?
Well, probably, again, move that story on from, 2005 I was at Harvard. Around about 2006, we began the process. In a big public company, if the senior person is replaced, it's a bit of a case of, the king is dead, long live the king. In the family business, it can work differently, and we had a kind of a graduated handover. And so between about 2006, 2007, the business was kind of effectively handed over to me. 2008, end of 2008, then we had the credit crunch and began really with Northern Rock in the UK, which was a bank that became bankrupt. And then, by the time you got through to the end of 2008, there were other very major banks that were going bankrupt. HBOS, for example. I know that the government stepped in, had to buy RBS, and had to buy a big share in Lloyds Bank. Well, we realised that in some of these banks that could have gone bankrupt, our company had something like £100 million deposited. So we were going through a situation, the whole economy was going through a situation where the normal rules that apply, if you put your money in the bank, it's safe, all of a sudden didn't apply anymore. And so we realised quite quickly that we had to do something quite drastic. In our business, we have a very good relationship with our staff. Our staff often stay with us for a long period of time. We don't have a high turnover of staff. But pretty much the first thing I had to do, having, assumed control of the business, was to, go through a redundancy program, and we lost a third of our UK staff. Many people had worked for my father, for the previous kind of 30 years or so. And that was quite a big thing, really, for me. The son comes into the business, and the first thing he's doing is breaking that kind of unofficial contract between the founder of the business and those people who had worked here for a long period of time, that their job is secure and safe. Now it wasn't. So that was a kind of a challenge that I had to deal with head on. And the way I dealt with it really was to say, well, okay, this process should not just be a negative one. It shouldn't just be about cutting costs and cutting our staff back because, we were living now in a new reality. I suppose I'd like to think of it as failing forward. So at the same time as cutting staff back, I was actually taking some other staff on. And that wasn't the most popular move, as you could imagine. But what I was doing was saying, well, okay, look, I don't just want to cut staff for the sake of it. What I've got to do is build a company that can trade successfully in the future under new circumstances. And for that, I needed some different people. And I used the strategy point that I mentioned earlier and I began to write what should our business look like to compete with in this new set of circumstances, and actually began to build that business.
Right. So what were the lessons learned in that process for you? It's quite a delicate situation.
Yeah, I think lessons learned there was many, of course, but I mean, you can't shy away from the difficult decisions. That as a Christian businessman, how do you deal with your own mind with regard to that? The way you deal with it is, I think, as I say, you can't shy away, but you still have your own principles. You've got to do it in as humane a way as possible. And we tried to make sure that we took the staff through this process of selecting, which staff members were going to be made redundant. We did that very, very carefully. We had also our HR people, looking and keeping tab. We kept contact with staff that had left us. And I think within about a 9-month period, I think all but one staff member had got another job. So, and most of them were getting other jobs within 3 or 4 months. And, casting mind back to that period, not a lot of people were taking staff on. So I think, you have to, as a Christian businessman, I think you have a responsibility to take the hard decisions, but to take them in the best way that you possibly can. So don't shy away from the hard decisions, I would say, is a good one. And also think ahead. Don't think, oh, well, maybe I can stumble on and maybe I can postpone this decision. No, we took the decision early because we knew we wanted to be ahead of the game, really. So that was important.
Are you seriously fired up about growing as a leader in business or church-based ministry? Are you feeling somewhat frustrated about not having realized your full potential in what you've been called to do? Could you do with someone to help you get some extra clarity or to be a sounding board for your plans and ideas? Great athletes have coaches, so do great leaders. The right leadership coach for you will result in an increased sense of clarity, direction, and purpose, dramatically increasing the results you achieve. If you're ready to step up, contact Errol to book a free, no-obligation introductory coaching session and see whether Errol is the right coach for you. Errol takes the lessons learned from his own leadership journey and from his extensive research to help leaders and entrepreneurs to step into their biggest challenges and rise to their next level. Email admin@errollawson.com right now to schedule your call.
Brilliant. So at this stage now in the journey, more than 10 years now at the helm, so to speak, how do you now define success?
Success is very interesting, isn't it? Because I like football, and I have supported for many years Manchester United. And Manchester United, as people who follow football will know, won the Premiership many times. And of course, you sort of think, well, that's it, you've done it, you've achieved it, it's fantastic, that's success. And of course, within a week later, that's sort of old newspaper, really, and they're beginning the process of trying to repeat and do the same thing again. So actually, when success, I suppose the definition that I would put on success is not actually achieving a goal that you set out to achieve. It would probably be always finding yourself in a state where you're moving forward with hope. And I think you can be, for those teams that didn't win the Premiership, doesn't mean maybe they were unsuccessful on that occasion, but they didn't stop. They didn't sort of shut up shop and say, "Oh, that's it. We didn't win. Forget it. We're out of here." No, they actually said, "Well, okay, we didn't win this year. How can we improve so that we might win next year?" And I think, to me, success is not a single occasion or occurrence. It's a state of mind, really. And I'll best describe it like that. Your state of mind is you are always moving forward with hope.
It's good. And John Maxwell said that the secrets to your success are hidden in your daily agenda, your daily routine. Typically speaking, what do the first 90 minutes of your day look like?
Staring at the back of my eyelids for the first two of them, I think.
I've got to change all the time with 5 kids.
Yeah, actually, me and my wife are a little different. She is a sort of a morning person, really. She can jump out of bed at 6:30 in the morning and function normally, but late at night, she's a little more tired. I'm exactly the other way around. So I'm a kind of a night owl, really, but I'm quite slow to rise in the morning, and I have to get up slowly. If I ever have the alarm on and I wake up quickly, for probably about the first hour and a half, don't bother talking to me. You might not get a sensible answer. So the first hour and a half of my day, it's waking up, tends to be reading. I might do a few emails on my iPad in bed or whatever, a little bit of reading of the news, that kind of thing. And then really it's taken up with getting myself ready for the office. I live about 10 or 15 minutes drive away from the office. It used to be that I was, about 10 years or so ago, we moved head offices. And before that, I was about an hour away from the office. And that was always quite a good time in the car to think about the day ahead. And so I used to do that, but I don't do that anymore. And obviously, reading, including reading the Bible, I think that's obviously really important. That's something I've never found really easy to do, to be honest with you. I have quite a short attention span, so I do struggle with that. But I think it's, as much as you can, you've got to try and keep in a discipline of constantly reading all sorts of things to try and get inspiration and understanding from, but that must always include, as a Christian, the Bible, which frankly, to my mind, there is not a book that I've read that comes even close to giving you the sense and structure in your life and principle in business that you can get out of the Bible.
So how does your faith play a role in your business? People who are listening right now, I think some are they're going to be business owners and Christian business owners. They're going to be aspiring entrepreneurs and leaders from different parts of the world. And to see someone who's accomplished what you have done with an international business like you have, some are thinking, well, is that possible? How do I combine my faith with my business? How does my faith play a role? How do I give honor to God in my business or through business? How have you navigated that?
Good question. There was an example recently. I mean, to give you an example, I actually don't believe in the idea of Christian business, to be absolutely honest, because a business is a business and its idea is to make money, provide services and products and that kind of thing. I believe in Christian businessmen and women. And actually, if you are in business and you do well in business, that's just a resource. That resource is you as a person, and it's you as a person that then could give financially into the kingdom or into your local church or whatever. In our business, we don't have lots of Christians. We do have a number of Christians. We don't specifically employ Christians. We employ people who are the right people for the culture of our business, and that does often mean that the culture of our business is based on Christian principles, no question about that. At the top, being at the top of the business, we set the culture. Whatever it is that, your listeners are involved in and doing, that you are setting the tone and the culture for those who are working with you and who are working for you. So to that degree, the culture in our business is really quite Christian. But that doesn't mean that we employ Christians. To give the example I was going to mention, because everybody knows, people who come to work for us, it's quite common knowledge that our family has strong Christian beliefs. The company gives a lot of money to Christian Vision, which is a charity my father established in the 1980s. So all our staff know that, and obviously they don't have an objection to that, otherwise they wouldn't work for us. But there was one particular thing that happened last year. We had a reasonably senior guy in our business. Actually, he ran one of our businesses in Ireland. He was MD of our Irish business. And very nice character, very well liked, very well known. And he had developed a brain tumour last year. And so he had this operated on, and he obviously didn't get all of it out, and he's currently going through chemo and various other different treatments. And he wrote an email to all of our staff. And I would say he's somebody who has some kind of a faith. He comes from a Catholic country, being Ireland. And so I wouldn't call him a regular churchgoer, but he had a faith. And what he wrote to the rest of the company by email was, look, this has happened to me. If you have even a little bit of faith, would you say a prayer for me? And about once every quarter, we have a kind of a town hall meeting that we call Speakeasy. And that's where I get all the staff in our head office, and we have a sort of lunch laid on, and I get the management team just to stand up and talk about the business and what's been going on. And I felt challenged that since this staff member had written to everybody about praying, and I run these speakeasies, I felt that we should pray for him in this speakeasy meeting. It was quite unusual. It's normally a meeting that's taken over with business discussion. But I felt quite strongly that was the right thing to do. And I had to think through a lot of things, because, of course, we have people working for us who are from other faiths. And, what if somebody was a Muslim and they wanted to say a Muslim prayer? I had to think through all those things and the implications of that. Nevertheless, we have a company chaplain, so I asked the chaplain, would you stand up in our speakeasy and would you pray for this man? And so we did do that. And I was interested to what people's feedback and response was. And, of course, everybody prayed. Not everybody, as I said, were Christians. In fact, most weren't. But I think everybody did feel they understood. Even if they didn't believe the same things that I believe, they understood that shows that we actually do care about our staff. And we do, genuinely. So that was one way that I was able to show how I, as a person, I, as a businessman, would want to deal with things that we don't like happening to us, and we prayed for his healing.
That's great, awesome, and that's definitely going to have an impact on people across the organisation. And I suppose, are there any other habits that have contributed towards your success so far? Any other habits?
Habits. Habits is a good thing. I suppose the answer to that is, a good habit is not to take yourself too seriously, really. I think that, when it's very easy to see, to look at, big business figures we see in our country or any country. We all know them, don't we? Bill Gates and Richard Branson and these kind of very famous, well-known people. When you are at the top of an organization, actually, you've come up from, in my case, I came through the organization. So as I went through the organization, new employees didn't see who I used to be. They see who I am now, and that's often how they would treat me. But who I really am now is also who I used to be, if you understand what I mean. So the same person that came through the business is the same person that was leading the business. And so I didn't feel that people, that they should... I didn't quite understand. It took me a while to realise that actually for people to walk into my office, some people would be rather fearful and afraid of that. It didn't register with me at all. It's just me, in my own head. I am me. I'm the same person that I was 25 years ago when I first started with the business, etc. I think senior people at the top of all organisations must always think like that. They all have their fears. They all have their failings, the things that they think they've done well. They all have ego to deal with. And I think that, however well you do, it is very easy to let that sort of success begin to define what you think about yourself. And I think the best advice is don't take yourself too easily. It's a good habit to get into. I heard a story once that I don't know how true this is, and historians may be able to tell me it's true or otherwise, but the Roman Empire, they had a rule that the army was not allowed to go into the city of Rome, except for when the army had come back from a great victory, they were allowed to parade through the city so that all of the Roman citizens could sort of come along and wave palms and cheer and say, fantastic, this is the glory of Rome and blah, 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 all that sort of thing. And the emperor would be on a chariot and he'd have somebody holding up the laurel wreath, which sort of signified, I think, victory. It signified that he was powerful and he was the emperor. So it signified glory, really. The guy would hold the laurel wreath above his head as the procession happened through the city. But in his ear, he would be whispering something like, all glory is fleeting. And I thought, that's a great story, very, very smart. I was told it, I'm not sure if it's true, but the point about it is that is such a key thing, that when you feel like you've made it, you've got to remember that it's fleeting. Don't take yourself too seriously. Don't get carried away. We are all really quite similar people.
Good. It's good. Thank you, man. Thank you for sharing that. And what's your biggest weakness as a leader?
I probably would. Well, I know what it is actually, but I think that often strength and weakness is the same thing. Your biggest strength and your biggest weakness are opposite ends of the same issue. And I think it would be true of me. So my biggest weakness, I think, is that I'm quite an optimistic person by nature. And over being optimistic, that can lead you to being a little bit casual sometimes, can be a little bit overconfident. So I'm quite good at sort of doing things on the fly. And, as I say, I'm a very naturally positive and optimistic person. But that probably means that sometimes in business particularly, you need people around you who aren't so optimistic and who understand, actually, yeah, it's great to do stuff on the fly, but we need some organization here. We need some rigor and we need some process. So I tend to be weaker at the process thing and better at speaking, better at inspiring and all those sort of things. But actually, it's a strength. It's my strength, but it probably is also my greatest weakness, therefore, too.
It's good. So that's your biggest strength, yeah?
I think it probably is my strength. I'm optimistic, yeah. I mean, so for example, when we went through the 2008 situation, there were a lot of questions being asked, including by my father, about, well, shouldn't we really heavily restructure the business? Is the car business, because we're in cars, property and finance, three main legs to our business. The car business was the one that was most heavily affected. Shouldn't we be sort of completely cutting that back? What's the future in it? And I'm always quite optimistic. My response there was no, I believe in it for the future. I can't exactly articulate or tell you how it's going to look successful, but I just know that it's going to be successful in the future. And so if you start from that point of view of being positive, this is going to work, you begin to work to find a way to make it work. Whereas if your starting point is, well, I'm not actually sure about this, then you become not quite so committed to making something work. So that leads me to being, I think, optimistic, but quite persistent and tenacious. I don't tend to give up easily. That also can be a weakness too, because sometimes, there's the expression about not flogging a dead horse. Sometimes you have to admit that actually this isn't going to work and we've got to stop it. And I'm not very good at that. I need other people in the business to tell me that.
So when at the beginning of your leadership journey, when you're just starting out, what, if anything, was holding you back from going into leadership?
Nothing really. I said to you, for me, it started as a young age. I always, the kind of, but as I said, the optimism inside of me. I have a fairly simplistic outlook on life. I remember one time my dad, I don't know how old I would have been. I'd have been a teenager, I think, probably about 14, 15, and maybe I had a bad school report or something like that, and we had one of those talks. Come on, son, what do you want out of life? And so he asked me the question, look, what do you want out of life? And I think he was asking the question, expecting to pick holes with my answer and say, no, son, you want this, And I just said, you know what, Dad, I just kind of want to be happy. And he sort of sat and thought, oh, I actually can't really pick holes with that. So I didn't say to him, no, this is the plan for my life, this is what I want to do, I want to do this so I can become a great leader. I was kind of relaxed and settled with who I am. And that kind of, well, that answer really was, I would still in many ways say it today, I want to be happy and fulfilled in whatever it is that I'm doing. So for me, it was a natural thing that if I wanted to follow my father's footsteps, which I worked out quite early, I knew that was going to involve me in leadership. So I was never really afraid of it. And I always felt when I came into the business, I said that I started from the bottom. I always knew that there would come a time when I would be asked to run my first business. I started the business when I was 22, and I was 26 when they asked me to run my first business. It was a business that was failing actually, and I suppose through some of my own skill, but also through circumstance, in the period that I ran that business, I was able to turn it around. And then it was actually a business in Sweden. We have in Sweden. I left that business after about 18 months, came back to the UK, and a few years later, a guy came along who was much better than I ever was at that business, and that business is now flying. It's a fantastic business for us across Scandinavia. So didn't have to be the best person for running that business, but I was the person who had the right skills at the right time.
Yeah, it makes sense. You really sound like your dad did a great job, you know. You think of, biblical model of fatherhood, really, leaving a legacy for your children's children. It just sounds like there's much, I guess, we can learn from that as well. I mean, has that impacted the way you've raised your children? Do you see them kind of wanting to get into business as well? And how do you have those conversations with them?
Yeah, I mean, my children, 5 children ranging from 14 to 22, actually just early February, our eldest child is due to have our first grandchild. And so she's not going to be in the business. She actually is, she went to university and with textiles and design, so she's working in interior design, which is not an area of business that currently, anyhow, that we're involved in. But some of the other 4, my second daughter, she's very interested in coming into the business. And I think actually there will be, and my son also, so my son's the youngest. So I've always said to them, look, it is important to understand and to respect the fact that as a family, the family culture and the business culture, they're very, very linked. They're quite similar. The business culture is a reflection of the culture within our family. And so even if you wish to put your career somewhere else, you have to understand that our family is in a very privileged position, and people who are working in our business have helped to put us there. So we as a family owe a debt of loyalty to the company, and we are the owners and governors of that company, so we have a responsibility to it. So that's not to say, children, that you have to be involved directly working for the business, but one day you will be shareholders in the business. You'll come to own and certainly have a big influence over the business. So whether you want to be directly involved or not, you have to come to respect and love the company, and don't be a stranger to it. So I didn't want to put pressure on them that they've got to come and work in the family business. Happily, some will be doing that, I'm sure. But I did want them to understand that it's a question, in my mind at least, of sort of respect for all those people that work to grow the company. I think that is a good way of saying it. They should feel like they should never be a stranger to the business. And that's actually how we've managed it. I think many of the staff in our company know all of our children, and that staff events and various different business events are often have my children along, really, so they're exposed to the business and exposed to the people. I think that's actually been a healthy thing, and probably appreciated by the feedback I get is it's highly appreciated by the staff.
That's great. And we're almost done now, Andy. Really good stuff. Who have been your top 3 most significant mentors?
Obviously got to say my father, but that is kind of an obvious one, so I won't talk too much about him. I mean, he is a genius of a businessman, really. He's much better than I. And but happily for me, what I have to do in business is different to what he had to do. He started the business from scratch. That is a hard thing to do, very, very difficult thing to do. The kind of personality you need for that is, when a business is young, has no fat on its back. So within inside a business management team, there's always communication issues. Even if you're all friendly and talking regularly to each other, if I say something, I know exactly what I mean, but the person on the other side of the table may have understood it slightly differently, and so that is a compromise to the business being effective and efficient. If only one man is really making all the decisions, which is usually the case in the early days, there is no kind of communication issue in his own mind. He knows exactly what he's talking about. So the founder of our business, my father, he was able to use his brilliance to grow the business to a large size. However, the job for me was not to start the business from zero. I took it on when it was already a large business. So the job for me, a little bit like the parable of the talents, I didn't want to just stick it, hide it under the bed basically and do nothing with it. I felt the challenge for me was take it to beyond where I started with it and keep it growing. And to do that, I figured that it's not got to be me that's the genius, if you like. What I've got to do is run the business through the people below me. So, if my father was one man at, say, 200%, even if I've got 10 people working directly for me as senior directors who are working at 80%, that's still more. Yeah, that's kind of my slightly imperfect way of thinking about it. And so what I realized quickly is I actually had to create an atmosphere for people below me to be successful. So anyhow, my father was a very big mentor, but then I had somebody else within the business who did me an amazing favor, really. And it was just before the time that I ran my first business. I'd been in the company maybe 1 or 2 years, and my father asked this man to set up a new business unit. And he sort of said, on one condition, Bob, my dad's name is Bob, and he said, on one condition, Bob, that you give me Andrew to work for me, and I want to mentor him. And he was actually also a very optimistic guy. So he taught me a lot of things, really. And actually the biggest thing that I suppose he did for me was that he believed in me, and he understood the importance of having a non-family member or someone who's not my father mentoring me to help run the business. So he did me a big favor for that. And it leads me on to the third, because you asked for 3. One of the things he said to me, this guy, he wasn't a Christian, he said, I've seen this before. He said, one of the big advantages that you've got is that you were raised in church. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, don't underestimate the ability to be able to stand up and talk confidently, because as part of as the leader of a business, one of the things you have to be is a broker in hope. You've got to be able to inspire people to don't necessarily look at the facts, look at what we're going to do and what we're going to achieve. You've got to be able to motivate and inspire, and it's very helpful to be able to do that. And this guy said, I've seen it before in people from church. If you've been brought up in church, you're used to standing up and talking and speaking in front of people, and don't underestimate that as a tool to build the right atmosphere in your business.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So was there, I know you've given us a lot of insights there. If we was to dig into maybe that last relationship, or with your dad, what's the best piece of advice that they've given you? The best piece of advice that's really stuck with you?
Actually, funny enough, I've got 2 really, really good pieces of advice, and actually they didn't come from either of those 2 men. I once heard a Christian man, actually, who is in our industry, in the motor industry, a man called Peter Vardy. Once heard him answering this same question. He gave 2 pieces of advice. I'll use one of those. I will tell you both, but the 2 pieces of advice he gave was, get the very best people you can to work with you, and second, find out what good looks like. And so to find out what good looks like, the first one is also a great piece of advice, but to find out what good looks like, to me, is extremely important. You can waste a lot of time and energy and money building a business that you think is good, but until you know the people that you're competing against, you don't actually know really what is good. So make sure you find out what good looks like. The second piece of advice that I would give was when I used to work, my first job was Peugeot, and I worked in Peugeot in sort of late 1980s, early 1990s, and I trained as an accountant with them. And it was like a graduate trainee scheme, really. And they gave, as part of that, they gave me a mentor, and this was the chief accountant, a guy called Jeff Moe. And I remember something he said to me, and I would have only been about 18, 19 years of age at the time. He said, I'm going to give you some advice. He said, you'll get loads of advice from lots of different people, but this piece of advice, it took me till I was 24 to work it out. But when the penny dropped, it was very powerful. And he said, it's going to sound very simplistic, but when you practice it and when you understand it, it's much more powerful than you think. So I was intrigued what he was going to come out with. And he said, look, work out what it is that you want to do, then go do it. I thought, yeah, but what's the next bit? I thought that's just too simplistic. But when you sit and think about that, really what he was saying is, you can get lots of textbooks, you can get lots of theoretical ways of trying to achieve stuff, but at the end of the day, you need to sort of reverse all of that. Don't do what you think is the right thing to do. Focus on what you want to achieve, and then it doesn't matter how you achieve it, within reason, of course. But the point I'm making is, you may use things out of a textbook, you may use other people, you may use money, you may not use money. It doesn't matter. But so long as you're focused on what it is that you're trying to achieve, you'll find a way to achieve it and to move there. So don't be focused too much on the method. This is what the textbook says, or this is what other people have told me how to do it. Don't focus on that. You focus on what you're trying to achieve, and then find whatever way you need to achieve it.
That's brilliant. Some leaders have a process for that. Some have different, process that they go through. They sit down and they ask themselves certain questions. Is there a process that you've developed over the years? So when you've got a goal, say, in front of you, something you want to achieve, how do you actually sit down? What's your process for approaching that?
I mean, it'll probably take me too long to really answer. I can't say to you I have a written down process on a wall or in a computer or anything like that. But I think that you're going to draw on your experiences. You're going to draw on what you've read, your knowledge, on your gut. Actually, gut's important. Gut feel and instinct. That's extremely important. Some would think that's a soft value, but actually it isn't. Often there is risk, of course, in business, and simulating that risk. What is the risk that this is going to work or not work? What is the payoff if it does? Balancing can I afford to take that risk? Is the risk worth what I might get in return? A lot of that is gut feel, really. So I think you're mixing a whole lot of things. And the other thing I'll say is go back to one of the things I said earlier about not taking yourself too seriously. Don't think you've got to be the one that comes up with all the answers. Actually, I do believe in team leadership, and I think we operate a thing inside our business called Insights Discovery. You could probably Google it and find out online, but it's a kind of a personal profiling thing. What's good about it is it has 4 colours, and so that the colours, and that we're all a blend, and that those colours, they're sort of different energies. Blue is a bit more like process and meticulous and sort of ordered thinking. Yellow is a bit more motivational, extravagant. I'm more on the yellow side. Red is more sort of action, etc., etc. And what you learn from that is we're all a mix of those things, and we tend to favour some of the colours over others, but all of them are needed. So actually, what that teaches us, and what we've learned as a management team, is that no one of us on our own is enough to make the whole thing work. There will always be occasions when we need the input of others. So better, as I said before, don't take ourselves so seriously that we think we're the ones that have got to provide all the answers, because that's the motorway to failure, if you ask me.
Good. And last question for you. What's the one thing you're most fired up about right now?
Well, there's about 10. I won't give. I suppose I could give you a Christian answer, but I'm actually going to give you not a non-Christian answer, but an answer something to do with economy, and that's really Brexit. I felt very vocal about Brexit. I was in favour of it, actually, unusually for a businessman, but frankly, I think that we as a company are very used to trading, and I think there's so much, in my view, so much rubbish talked about with regard to Brexit. The thing is simple, and I know that people were talking about, well, is it a race issue? Is it actually? To me, it's extremely simple, really, and that is that we, as a country, about 40% or 45% of our trade is with Europe. But Europe is only 17% of the world. So people were sort of saying, well, we should be trading. How dare we turn our back on these 45% of that we're trading with? But actually, for me, I see it another way. I see it, and often business people do. They'll see the reverse side. The reverse side to me is we're doing a terrible job with the rest of the world if only 55% of our trade is with the rest of the world. So I see, Brexit is history now. The vote's gone through, and I think I would like to see more of the business community, rather than try to regurgitate over old news, really begin to think about. I think actually the business community has a responsibility to begin to think about the opportunities that brings. Don't think negatively about it. Think positively about it, and I think let's all move forward. We want to see in our society, leaving the European Union, we want opportunity to grow trade with other nations, because I think when you grow trade, it grows relations with other nations, which I think is extremely important. We don't want a society that is exclusive, excludes other races, it's ageist, or any of these other things. We want an open society that's welcoming, but that makes sense for long-term for the people who are invested here too. So in terms of immigration, I think it's, as an employer, I think the problem that we had with the European Union is it was one type of labour that was flooding the market and depressing wages for people. But actually, as an employer, it's very difficult to get very educated, highly educated labour, because you couldn't import people from Africa and from the US and from Asia. That was banned. You weren't able to do that very easily at all. For me, Brexit was a very positive thing, and I really would like to see the business community begin to embrace it rather than fight it. And let's get on and create a fantastic society for all, and that celebrates and promotes trade, commerce, and business.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I know people are listening, and there's all sorts of perspectives on that. I'm actually quite happy about it myself, too. So I'm with you on that. Is there a book or a resource you'd recommend to a leader or entrepreneur that's listening right now?
Probably the best one, I think, something that I found really very useful. It's not that new anymore, really. It's by a guy called Jim Collins from Good to Great. You may have had a recommendation for that book previously. But the thing that really was interesting to me there was this book was born out of research of the American stock market. I can't remember if it was the NASDAQ or what. I can't remember which one it was, but it wasn't the main stock market. It was the sort of big tech stocks, I think. And he defined super performance, and he had some definition for it of, the top sort of 10% performers and way above the rest of the market. And what he did was he went and interviewed the CEOs of these really super performing businesses to try and find the common themes. And to his surprise, he didn't really find any, except for what he expected to find was, really super big personalities and this kind of thing. And actually, more often than not, these were reasonably quiet people, not particularly extrovert. But he then, on closer inspection, began to see some links. And he up to that point, he'd written about the 4 levels of leadership. And through this study, he basically wrote there's a level 5 leadership. Actually, and I think level 5 leadership is a bit more like Jesus' style of leadership. He would say that a level 5 leader would typically talk about, if you would say, look how well you've done, he would say, well, it's not me. Look at these people below me. Here's a guy. Look at the performance that he's done. So they deflect that to the people below them. That would be one of their characteristics. But another would be that they had extremely high standards. So they would want to give credit to other people where credit was due, but they would also have internally very high standards for operation for those people, working in the organisation. That was the second one I remember. There was a third one that's just slipped my mind, but it's an extremely good and useful book. I found. The third one is that typically level 4 leaders, who he said were very, these quite extrovert, big personalities, a little bit full of ego maybe, what they wanted to see is that when they left the business went down, because that would tell everybody how good they were. He said a level 5 leader would consider that some sort of failure, really. What a level 5 leader was looking for was to build the business or the organisation so that when they leave, it can actually keep growing beyond the point that they left it at. And I think, there's something that I really respect about that.
It's good. It's great, man. Great recommendations. And Andy, how do we find out more about you? Like, someone's listening right now. I know you got the Lions program as well. Is there anything else you want to let people know about that you're doing right now?
We're doing many things, but you mentioned the Lions program. The Lions is something we started about 5 years or so ago, and I realised that, back on the theme of I don't believe in Christian businesses, but I do believe in Christian business people. And I think that whether you are in business as a Christian or whether you are running some sort of organisation or even a church, you might be running a social welfare type of organisation, you might be running a church. It's still leadership, and I think there are a lot of principles in the Bible and things that I've learned myself that through experience that I wanted to kind of pass on a little bit, really. And I found that I'd come into contact with a number of people who are doing great things around the country, people like Andy Hawthorne from The Message, people like Tim Jutt from Big Church Day Out. I've become friendly with a lot of these people. And so the idea we came up with was a little bit like mixing, I suppose, Dragon's Den. It's a twist on Dragon's Den in a sense. And what we wanted to do, not for the sake of making a TV show, but actually for the sake of releasing and beginning some projects for the sake of the kingdom of God. And so what we do is we select every year. We normally get about 50 or so applicants, and we select about 12 to 15 to go through a course. And in that course, and these are people who come with a project, so they're not extremely young. They're people who've got a bit of experience about them. They've got a project that they may have already started, or they may have just be starting it. And we'll take them through a process, which is very interactive, very engaging. Got quite a lot of the ideas of it from Harvard, so you get case studies that we've developed in there. And quite close quarters exposure to some of these people that I mentioned earlier. There's about 10 or 12, we sort of call them lions, really. I thought lion was better than dragon. So we've got sort of 10 or 12 of these guys, and you get very close exposure to them. And it's an opportunity for them also to be able to invest in good soil. And that was the key thing that we wanted. So guys coming on the course would get close quarter exposure. We try to, over the course of a year, unpick what you think you know about your project and the way that you're looking at your project, with a view to try to help you, not give you the answers, but teach you a way to think so that you can come up with better answers to problems that you may already think you've solved in terms of creating your project, or even if you're halfway through your project. And so the idea is that we will then the year builds up to what we call the Lion's Lair, where you will present to the Lions your project, and some of those projects we take forward and support into a second and sometimes third year, and we'll help people who get selected to begin and plant that project. You can find out more about it on, I think the website is www.lions.org. lions.org.uk
Great.
or thelions.org.uk.
And are you on social media? Are you on Twitter, Facebook, anything like that?
I'm on Twitter as I think it's Andy Edmiston. I think that's who I am. So I'm not a completely avid social media person. My wife, I tend not to look at Facebook. My family will tell me anything because they're all on Facebook if there's anything important going on. But yeah, from time to time I do tweet, and if you follow some of my tweets, you'll find things about, often retweets about Manchester United or Brexit or some other people that are friends of mine. Often pass on their tweets, really. So, but I'm not a religious user of it, to be brutally honest.
Awesome. Well, guys listening, go and check out Andy's stuff. If you are someone interested in growing it or developing a business idea that you have, do check out the Lions. I know that Andy's, as you've seen today, is really generous with his just his wisdom and his insight. So hit him on Twitter, hit him up on and drop him a line. Get in touch, man, and just plug into all the resources that are available there. Andy, thank you for your time today, man.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate you having just being here today and giving us your wisdom and your experiences and your insights. Really, really helpful.
No problem. Delighted.
Thank you again for joining us today on the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast. I pray you've been inspired, you've been lifted, you've been encouraged to take your personal leadership to the next level. We really encourage you guys to just take action, make it happen, do something, start somewhere, go out and change the world in some way, big or small. Guys, if you've enjoyed the podcast today, please share with your friends, share with your loved ones, your colleagues, someone out there you think might benefit from hearing this great content. And if you want some more questions answering, you got a question, email me, errol@errollawson.com. Or if you want a free 30 to 45 minute coaching session with myself around a leadership challenge or issue you're working on in your business, your church, or in your organization, please feel free to email me right away or get you booked in. It's errol@errollawson.com. Thank you again for listening. Go to our iTunes page, check it out, check out the previous episodes. Give us a nice review, that would be awesome. Really appreciate if you could do that for us. We really appreciate you just for being here and listening. Thank you so much. God bless you.